What's up, guys? Thank you for coming back for part 2 in our series on corruption. If you haven't seen the first video, please click on this link because we're going to pick up right where we left off. We're going to continue with Kash Patel. Listen to him talk about corrupt FBI agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page.
Remember the Lovebirds text from, this is a beauty, the Lovebirds text from FBI, DOJ land, Russiagate, Strzok and Page were texting each other. They were running the Russiagate investigation against Trump. They were the head of the counterintelligence unit at the FBI, and they're having an extramarital affair together. Can't make this stuff up. They're sending each other texts about how much they hate Trump and are going to create an insurance policy to stop Trump. Then we finally find those text messages. You know what the FBI and DOJ do for like a year? Redact them to congressional investigators and congressional men and women running the oversight.
The insurance policy to stop Trump. This is what he's talking about. The FBI put agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page in charge of the fake Russia collusion case, and they hated Trump. They were in a meeting with Andrew McCabe, who was the second in command at the FBI, the guy that we talked about in part 1. And in that meeting, they all agreed there was no way Trump was going to beat Hillary. But just in case he did, they were going to use the fake Russia collusion case to have him removed. That was the insurance policy. Here's Peter Strzok's text message.
I want to believe that the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, meaning Trump, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before 40.
I'm afraid we can't take that risk of Trump winning. So they created this insurance policy, i.e. the fake Russia collusion case, to have him removed in case he did win. This is clear as day, as you'll see in the next text message. Lisa Page asked Peter Strzok, Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? And Peter responds, no, he won't. We'll stop it. If that doesn't prove that the corrupt FBI was out to sabotage Trump, then nothing does. When Trey Gowdy questioned Peter Strzok about sending this text message, what do you think his excuse was?
And then on August the 8th, you still hadn't interviewed anyone. You're 8 days into your Russian collusion with the Trump campaign investigation, and you got another text from your colleague, Lisa Page. Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? And you replied, no, he's not. We'll stop it. Here's what I want to know. Who's the he and he's not?
He is then candidate Trump.
So when you said, no, Donald Trump's not, in connection with the question, going to become president, what's the it?
Chairman
we'll
Gowdy.
Stop it.
Chairman Gowdy, that text needs to be taken in the context of
I'm asking, look, if you want to have a debate over a 2-letter word, we're going to have to do that some other time. What and who did you mean by it?
Mr. Gowdy, as I've stated, that text was written late at night in shorthand.
I don't care when it was written. I don't care whether it was longhand, cursive. I don't care about any of that. I want to know what it meant, Agent Strzok.
It would be his candidacy for the presidency, and my sense that the American population would not vote him into office.
Right. Well, we hadn't gotten to the will yet.
Well, I'm trying to cut to the chase and explain the text.
The will is the American people. Is that right? That's your testimony. The will stop it. You were speaking on behalf of the American people. Is that correct?
Mr. Gowdy, what my testimony is and what I said during extensive asking of this question during my prior interview is I don't recall writing that text.
Of course he doesn't remember. By the way, not only were these 2 corrupt agents put in charge of the fake Russia investigation against Trump, but they were also in charge of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And they were so in love with Hillary that they wrote her exoneration letter before they even interviewed her. They wanted Hillary to win, and they were going to do anything they could to make that happen. In fact, it was Peter Strzok who changed the words grossly negligent to extremely careless in James Comey's press conference. Why is this important? It's because the words grossly negligent actually appear in the statute. Even CNN had to admit that this was a big deal.
Messages by this agent raised questions about whether or not justice was truly blind in the investigation into Hillary Clinton. Well, Jake, sources we have learned from tell us that the electronic records show that Peter Strzok changed former FBI Director James Comey's earlier draft language describing Clinton's actions in handling classified materials from, quote, grossly negligent to extremely careless. Take a listen to what Comey said, clearing the former Secretary of State back in 2016.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
Now, this key shift from grossly negligent to extremely careless may seem like mere semantics, but it actually reflects a decision that the FBI could have had a potentially serious legal implication here, as the federal law that actually governs the handling of classified materials establishes criminal penalties for gross negligence. So the change there actually is legally significant.
Of course it's legally significant. That's why they changed it. They couldn't spell out the elements of a crime and then not charge her. So those exact words, grossly negligent, that appear in the statute, did not appear anywhere in James Comey's press conference. Strzok and Page did not want Trump to beat Hillary, and they did everything they could to make sure it wouldn't happen. Now, what do you think happened to these two corrupt agents?
But it gets even better. Here's the deep state full circle. Just last week, do you know what Strzok and Page received from the Department of Justice?
What?
A $1.5 million payout to settle a lawsuit that Strzok and Page brought for the improper disclosure of their personal text messages on FBI phones. And the DOJ just rewarded them. They broke the law. They broke the chain of command. They broke every regulation there is in the FBI. They weaponized the system of justice against a political target they hated. We found those text messages, but the deep state came full circle and gave these guys a payday for rigging a presidential election and breaking the law.
That's true. It was actually $2 million. $1.2 million went to Lisa Page and $800,000 went to Peter Strzok. This was paid out by Merrick Garland's corrupt DOJ just 4 months before the election. So this is why the FBI needs a complete overhaul. Strzok was corrupt, Page was corrupt, McCabe was corrupt, and of course, James Comey. What James Comey and Peter Strzok did to General Mike Flynn was beyond disgraceful.
According to newly released documents, on January 4th, 2017, FBI agents decided to close their investigation of Michael Flynn and his ties to Russia. After much searching, they had found, quote, no derogatory information about Flynn. So it was over. He was in the clear. But it wasn't over. Corrupt FBI official Peter Strzok demanded that the investigation stay open until the Bureau could invent a crime and crush Michael Flynn. And in the end, that's what happened. Hey, he wrote to a colleague on January 4th, don't close Razor. That was the internal name for the Michael Flynn investigation. At this point, it was over for Michael Flynn, though he didn't know it. The FBI arranged an interview with Flynn at the White House. He had no idea what was coming. According to handwritten notes, FBI officials plotted to, quote, get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired. It worked.
That's true. Here's the handwritten note he's talking about. What's our goal? Truth, admission, or to get him to lie so we could prosecute him or get him fired? Now let's talk about that. I can tell you as a cop, I've questioned, I don't even know, maybe 1,000 people. As cops, that's all we do. That is a basic function of our duties, is to ask questions, whether you're pulling someone over or you're interrogating someone about a homicide. The basic function of police work is investigation, and that involves asking questions. And I can tell you 100% of the time, in every single case, the goal always is to get the person to tell you the truth. It is never, ever to get the person to lie. The only reason the corrupt FBI did this to Michael Flynn is so they could charge him with a crime. And Comey is proud of this.
It's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the same room. How did that happen?
I sent them. Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration, in the George W. Bush administration, for example, or the Obama administration. The protocol, two men that all of us have perhaps increased appreciation for over the last 2 years. And in both of those administrations, there was process. And so if the FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official, you would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals and who would be there. And I thought, it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over. And so we placed a call to Flynn, said, hey, we're sending a couple guys over. Hope you'll talk to them. He said, sure. Nobody else was there. They interviewed him in a conference room at the White House Situation Room, and he lied to them. And that's what he's now pled guilty to.
What did he think they were coming over there for?
I don't think he knew. No, we didn't tell him. Just said, we got sending over a couple of agents. I want to ask you some questions. I didn't have this conversation. My deputy director did. But hope you got a few minutes you can sit down and talk to them. And he said, sure.
What a scumbag. What Comey doesn't mention is that Flynn asked them if he needed an attorney, and they told him no. Years later, a judge ruled that the FBI did not act in good faith, and Flynn's lie was so irrelevant to any investigation that he threw the case out. Now listen to Cash explain his plan for the FBI moving forward if he were put in charge.
I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops. You're cops. Go be cops. Go chase down murderers and rapists and drug dealers and violent offenders.
Go be cops. I love it. And that's exactly what the FBI is doing. In fact, Patel just announced that in the first 2 months, they've already arrested 3 on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list in just 8 weeks. I am glad to see headlines like this instead of headlines like this. By the way, this headline is correct. The FBI did in fact reward agents for kneeling. You see this picture? Her name is Sarah Linden. She was promoted to Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI and is now put in charge of Russian counterintelligence in the National Security Branch. Now let's talk about the collusion between Joe Biden and Merrick Garland. I'm going to show you something you've never seen before, and that is Joe Biden being honest. Back in 2022, Joe was asked what he would do if Trump decided to run again. Listen to his honest response.
Your predecessor is about to launch another campaign. So how do you reassure them, if that is the reason for their questioning, that the former president will not return, or that his political movement, which is still very strong, will not once again take power in the United States?
Well, we just have to demonstrate that he will not take power by if he does run, making sure he, under legitimate efforts of our Constitution, does not become the next president again.
I'm making sure that he doesn't become the next president again? And what do you mean you're using the Constitution to demonstrate or prove that he shouldn't be allowed to run? Using the Constitution as in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? You know, the part that says he can't run if he engaged in an insurrection? You just said the quiet part out loud, Joe. You just admitted to the whole world that you were working behind the scenes with Merrick Garland to prevent Trump from running if he decided to enter the race. In fact, the New York Times reports that you pressured Merrick Garland to prosecute Trump. That press conference was on November 9th. 6 days later, on November 15th, Trump announced that he was running again.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
On November 18th, 3 days after Trump made that announcement, Merrick Garland appointed Jack Smith as special prosecutor. And that is not a coincidence. We all know the only reason why Trump was being prosecuted was because he was running for president. That is a fact. And if you don't believe me, listen to Merrick Garland.
The Department of Justice has long recognized that in certain extraordinary cases, it is in the public interest to appoint a special prosecutor to independently manage an investigation and prosecution. Based on recent developments, including the former president's announcement that he is a candidate for president in the next election, including the former president's announcement that he is a candidate for president in the next election, and the sitting president's stated intention to be a candidate as well, I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint a special counsel.
There it is. He just admitted it. Because Trump was running again, he needed to appoint Jack Smith to prosecute him. Trump would have never been charged with any of these crimes if he weren't running for president or if he was someone else. And it happens over and over and over again to Donald Trump. Another example is the hush money trial with Stormy Daniels, where corrupt Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg ignores real criminals and decides to go after President Trump for a bookkeeping entry. Let me quickly sum up this case for you. Stormy Daniels claimed that she had an affair with Trump back in 2006. Stormy went to the Trump campaign and demanded $130,000 to keep quiet. Trump was married. Trump had his attorney, Michael Cohen, pay her the money and then had her sign an NDA. There is nothing illegal about this. It happens all the time. When Trump went to pay Michael Cohen the money back, Trump's accountants, in their accounting software, through the drop-down menu, classified those payments to Michael Cohen as a legal expense because a payment made to your attorney is a legal expense. Bragg said, no, that wasn't a legal expense. That should have been classified as a campaign contribution because keeping Stormy quiet helped you win the election. Now, that argument is flawed for 100 different reasons, and I could spend an hour wasting your time to prove it to you, but I don't want to get further into the weeds and bore you even more. But I'm going to show you one reason very quickly why this argument is flawed. Bragg claims that the crime was committed when they improperly classified that payment as a legal expense. It should have been classified as a campaign contribution. Well, let's look at the affidavit. It says, with intent to defraud, Trump made and caused a false entry in the business records of an enterprise. All right, that spells out the elements of the crime, right? But look at the date. Bragg's own filing states that this happened on February 14th, 2017. Where was Trump in February of 2017? He was already in the White House. Do you see how stupid Bragg's argument is? Bragg wants you to believe that those entries deceive the public and influence the election. But how can they influence the election when those entries were made after the election had already taken place? The case was a joke. It was only brought because Joe Biden and Merrick Garland wanted to put Trump in jail. In fact, Merrick Garland sent his Associate Attorney General, Matthew Colangelo, to Manhattan to work on the case with Alvin Bragg and prosecute Trump. Colangelo oversaw the civil rights, antitrust, and tax division. Why would someone who's number 3 at the DOJ, someone that high on the food chain, resign from that position to go work with a local prosecutor in Manhattan? It's because Joe and Merrick Garland sent him. Joe's fingerprints are all over this. The same thing in Georgia, where Joe's attorneys met with Nathan Wade. Do you remember him? Let me sum up the Georgia case for you. On election night 2020, Trump was trailing Biden by 11,000 votes. And these votes that were outstanding that hadn't yet been counted were in deep red counties that went overwhelmingly for Trump in 2016. So President Trump called Governor Brian Kemp and said, I'm short 11,000 votes. Can you find me 11,000? That's all he said. That's it. He didn't say, make them up. He didn't say, fabricate them. He said, can you find them? Meaning they already exist. Not a big deal, right? Not for Trump. Fulton County DA Fani Willis decided to charge Trump with fraud. And in an office with 140 people working for her, who do you think she chose to prosecute him?
We have a huge update in the Georgia sex scandal. Joe Biden's White House is directly involved. The Fulton County DA who forced Trump to take the mugshot, Fani Willis, allegedly hired the guy she was sleeping with to prosecute the Trump case. Fani's lover boy, Nathan Wade, was just a personal injury attorney you'd see on billboards and never even prosecuted a felony case in his whole career. Well, Fani decided Nathan was qualified in other ways and made him the highest paid prosecutor in the state. Fannie apparently hired her unqualified boyfriend and gave him nearly $1 million to prosecute Trump. But the $1 million in tax money isn't all really going to the case. A lot of it's going to wine and dine Fannie. Fannie's lover took her to Napa and a Caribbean cruise. Somehow Fannie found a way to get kickbacks from a sex scandal.
You see the scam? Fannie hires her unqualified boyfriend, then all the money that's paid to him gets laundered right back to her in the form of gifts. This is a huge conflict of interest because she has a financial incentive to keep the case going. If she were to throw the case out like an honest prosecutor would, all of the jewelry, the gifts, and the vacations go away. But it's worse than this because, as usual, this lawfare was also pushed by Joe Biden.
But it's a lot worse than a sexual kickback scheme. Documents show Fannie's lover boy met with the Biden White House while he was investigating Trump twice. Fannie's lover boy files for divorce. The next day, Fannie taps him to be Trump's special prosecutor. Then Fannie's lover boy has an 8-hour conference with Joe Biden's White House counsel. Then a few months later, the lover boy has an 8-hour interview with the White House. And lover boy billed the taxpayer $2,000 for each meeting, which would mean local prosecutors prosecuting Donald Trump are officially working with the Biden White House. And so Georgia taxpayers are getting billed so Fannie's boyfriend can conspire with Biden to lock up Trump. The people who are prosecuting fraud are the ones committing it. And the White House is always saying they have nothing to do with Trump's indictments. It's all being done independently. So then why are Biden's people meeting with Trump's prosecutors for 8 hours?
We know why. It's because Joe Biden is the most corrupt president we've ever had. Why else would Nathan Wade spend 8 hours on 2 separate days conferring with White House counsel? He wasn't there on a tour. He was planning the prosecution with Joe Biden's attorney. After Trump got indicted, Joe was asked about it. Watch his reaction.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir? Do you think the conviction will have an impact on the campaign? We'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Should he be on the ballot, sir?
That smile says it all. It is clear that Joe Biden was behind all of this lawfare. And when Joe wasn't using local DAs to go after Trump, he was using the FBI to go after his supporters.
Earlier this month, a longtime FBI agent and SWAT team veteran called Steve Friend came forward to blow the whistle on what he has seen happen to the FBI under Joe Biden. And what he said was shocking. According to Agent Friend, Biden's FBI routinely uses heavily armed SWAT teams to raid the homes of American citizens who dare to criticize the administration. Now, to be clear, these are people who pose no danger to anyone. These are people who haven't even been accused, much less convicted, of a violent crime. So the point is not to bring justice. The point is to terrify and intimidate Joe Biden's political opponents. The FBI suspended Agent Steve Friend for daring to reveal what was happening, these abuses. Now, it's illegal under federal law to punish whistleblowers, but the FBI did it anyway. And then, 4 days later, with Friend out of the way, on the morning of September 23rd, a team of nearly 30 FBI agents bristling with automatic weapons raided the home of yet another harmless man with no criminal record. That man's name was Mark Houck. Houck is 47. He's a leader in his local Catholic community. FBI agents pointed rifles at Houck and his wife in front of their 7 children. Once again, to be clear, Houck is not a terrorist. He's never been accused of terrorism. He is instead a pro-lifer. In October of last year, Houck was standing outside another abortion clinic in Pennsylvania. He was joined again by his 12-year-old son. That's when a man approached and began harassing the boy. So to defend his son, Houck pushed the extremist back. That was it. Local police looked into it. The district attorney's office looked into it. Nobody pressed charges against Mark Houck because it's not assault to protect your son from an extremist who's attacking him. But the Biden Justice Department decided to revise this view, and they charged Mark Houck with a federal crime, a felony, obstructing abortion access. There was no evidence that he had obstructed abortion access, but that's what they charged him with. Now, Houck learned About 3 months ago, the DOJ planned to charge him, and he offered to turn himself in voluntarily. That's what a civilized country allows. But that wasn't good enough for Merrick Garland's DOJ. They wanted to punish him and terrify his family to send the right message to anyone who would dare get in the way of the Biden agenda. So the DOJ sent a team of federal agents with rifles to Houck's home. He now faces 11 years in prison for protecting his son.
11 years. Isn't that insane? And the guy offered to turn himself in, but instead of accepting his surrender, they tell him, no, go home, and then they raid his house. Tucker's right. This was done clearly to send a message. And 10 months earlier, the local police and the DA decided not to prosecute because no crime was committed. But Joe's corrupt DOJ decided to reopen the case and charge Mark Houck simply because he's pro-life. Because other than hating Trump, the only other thing the Democrats stand for is abortion. That's their entire platform. It's also why Merrick Garland has not prosecuted anyone for firebombing the pregnancy crisis centers. Watch this exchange between Senator Ted Cruz and Merrick Garland.
We've also seen across the country violent attacks at pregnancy centers by similar left-wing terrorist groups, including one graffiti of a firebomb building said, "Jane was here." There have been attacks all over the country. And yet, the Department of Justice has not brought these violent criminals to justice. You contrast that. If you're a violent criminal and you attack a crisis pregnancy center, that is not a priority in the Biden Department of Justice. Contrast that to Mark Houck, who's a pro-life activist. He's a sidewalk counselor. And he had an altercation with someone who allegedly interfered with his son's personal space and threatened his son, and he pushed him. Now, in an ordinary world, pushing someone would be maybe a simple misdemeanor assault, but not under the Biden Department of Justice. If you're a pro-life activist, what can you expect? Well, in this instance, according to Mr. Houck's wife, 24 agents clad in body armor and ballistic helmets and shields and a battering ram showed up at his house pointing rifles at his family. Why do you send 24 agents in body armor to arrest a sidewalk counselor who happens to be pro-life, but you don't devote resources to prosecute people who are violently firebombing crisis pregnancies?
It is a priority of the department.
Wait until you hear Merrick Garland's excuse for not being able to find those who are responsible for these attacks.
It is a priority of the department to prosecute and investigate, and they are doing it at night and in secret. And we have found one group which we did prosecute.
You found one. How many have there been? How many attacks?
There have been a lot.
Did you catch that? The head of the DOJ, working with the FBI, uses 30 agents to raid the home of a man who pushed someone on the sidewalk, but they can't figure out who's been firebombing these pregnancy crisis centers because they're doing it at night. Have you ever heard of something so ridiculous? Now, Merrick Garland didn't know the exact number of centers that were attacked. He only said that there were a lot, but it's not just pregnancy crisis centers. They've also attacked churches.
After the Dobbs case was decided by the Supreme Court, over 100 pregnancy care centers and over 300 churches in this country were attacked, vandalized, firebombed. Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many prosecutions Merrick Garland's Justice Department brought in those cases? I do not, Senator. It's a stunning number. It's 2.
It's way more than 400. There have been 436 attacks in 2023 alone. 2 prosecutions. Just 2. Let's go back to Josh Hawley. Listen to him explain how the FACE Act is being manipulated to go after pro-lifers.
Hundreds of churches, hundreds of pregnancy care centers. And I might just add, these pregnancy care centers, the attacks on them, which were violent, which were gruesome, were egged on and encouraged by rhetoric from members of Congress, including members of this body, who have said that pregnancy care centers aren't real medicine, that they're not real doctors, They have legitimized these attacks. And the same thing was true of churches. And this Justice Department couldn't lift a finger to defend these Americans. But at the same time, they used legislation, a law known as the FACE Act, to prosecute at least 53 different pro-life demonstrators, including people like Mark Houck.
The FACE Act was signed into law in 1994 by President Bill Clinton. FACE stands for Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances. Entrances, that's the key word. It criminalizes anyone who's blocking the entrances to any of these clinics. But most of the pro-lifers, including Mark Houck, that have been charged using this act, were protesting from the sidewalk. Are you surprised? I'll tell you something else that might surprise you about the FACE Act. It also applies to churches. The FACE Act explicitly punishes anyone who intentionally damages or destroys the property of a place of religious worship. The Democrats completely ignore the FACE Act when it comes to protecting churches from being vandalized, but they have no problem using it when it comes to abortion, because again, abortion is their only platform. In fact, Joe and Kamala created a reproductive task force to go after and prosecute pro-lifers.
Based on your experience with the FACE Act, Mrs. Hawley, do you think that the pro-abortion community is aware that the Biden-Harris administration is selectively applying the FACE Act against the pro-life community?
So I think it probably is, and I would point you to several press conferences that the Attorney General Gupta held. She announced just a short time after the Dobbs decision was released a reproductive task force, and noted that one of the goals of that reproductive task force during their daily meeting would be to seek out opportunities for FACE enforcement. And of course, that FACE enforcement would have been against pro-life individuals.
Not surprising, right? Prosecute Trump and go after his supporters. I could show you some of those press conferences she's talking about, but really it's just going to waste your time and bore you. That's all I got for you on this video. Thank you for staying to the end. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Please give me a thumbs up and share it. And if you have time, please comment. I read and answer all of the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.